We will continue our study of Joseph. We've been studying this for several weeks. I told Jimmy Wednesday night, I said, the worst I can do today is make y'all appreciate your regular teacher. And anytime I have to teach adults, I'm a little bit out of my comfort zone. And so I'm not probably going to say anything this morning that you're going to be amazed about. But what I hope to do this morning is to make you think. And I'm kind of a common sense person. And if I can make you think or help you to think about things, I feel like I've accomplished what I need to accomplish. I know that's for me when I'm sitting in the pew and I'm listening. I need to hear the things to make me think about my life and think about how I'm living and am I acceptable to God. When we study the Old Testament, as we have been doing, we know from Romans chapter 15:4 that the Old Testament, the old law, is for our learning. And when we look at the Old Testament, we need to remember that. We need to look and think, what can I learn from that? When we study any subject, what can I learn? You know, in 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 6, Paul said that the things that happened before to the Israelites should be a warning to us. So we ought to heed the warnings. When we see things, we can see patterns of things happening in history, and we can know that history doesn't usually change, and that we need to pay attention to those things. And a lot of times when we study the Old Testament, we do a high flyover, and we see things like Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and now Joseph, right? We see that at a high level, and we see that these were God's men. And we see it at a high level, but when we zero in on these men, these individual people, we can gain a whole lot from it. And we can learn a whole lot from it when we zero down on it. And that's kind of what we've been doing with Joseph. You know, when you study the Old Testament, when you look at the whole Old Testament, the good thing that comes out of that is God takes care of His people, those that obey Him. And that's what we need to learn from the Old Testament. God takes care of His people. We learn a lot about where we came from, we learn a lot about history, and we learn a lot about God in the Old Testament. The bad thing sometimes is God's people do not stay faithful very long. Think about it. Think about those Israelites. They just don't stay faithful very long. And that's kind of a scary thing for us today, because we are faithful. But what about the next generation and the next generation? We see history. We see what's happening. We see what happened in other places in the world. Look at Europe. And we're following in that pattern as a country. And it can be a scary thing. In the last lesson, where we left off, where Jimmy left off, Joseph was imprisoned and forgotten. That was the name of the lesson. And we see him interpret the two dreams of the cupbearer and the baker. And one dream was you're going to come out good. You're going to come out very good. You're going to be right back where you were at Pharaoh's hand. And the other dream was not so good. You're going to die. And but Joseph said in the end of chapter 40, he said, just remember me. Just remember me. Don't forget me. And that's kind of where that chapter ends. And this morning we're going to kind of summarize, go over, I'm going to read a good bit of it, of chapter 41. And our lesson today is remembered and promoted. It's always nice to be remembered and promoted. So let's look at chapter 41. After 2 whole years, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile. Now that was 2 years. 2 years has gone by. Joseph's in this pit, in this prison. 2 whole years. Think about being in a place for 2 whole years and you don't know the end of the story. You're just sitting there. You're innocent and you've been accused of being guilty of something. And behold, there came up out of the Nile 7 cows, attractive and plump, and they fed in the reed grass. And behold, 7 other cows, ugly and thin, came up out of the Nile after them, and stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. And the ugly, thin cows ate up the 7 attractive, plump cows, and Pharaoh awoke. And he fell asleep and dreamed a second time. And behold, 7 ears of grain, plump and good, were growing on one stalk. Now, you know, I've seen a lot of corn, but I've never seen 7 ears on a stalk. Think about that. Just something to think about. And behold, after them sprouted 7 ears, thin and brightly by the east wind. And the thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump full ears. And Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. You ever done that? You ever been dreaming something and it just seems really real, and you wake up and you think, that I was dreaming, and everybody's done that. Everybody understands where he's coming from. So in the morning, his spirit was troubled. He was worried. And he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. Well, I know you ladies think it can't be many of them because it's wise men, right? Okay. I've heard the wise men jokes. But what I understand about this is during that time there were men who were the more educated, smarter guys, and evidently if they were magicians, they would do things to fool people and make you think that they're smarter than what they really are. But they are the most educated people. You know, we can see that going on in the world with us today. They like to lead us where they want us to go. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was none who could interpret the dream to Pharaoh. At least they were honest enough to say, we don't know. We don't know what this dream's all about. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, I remember my offenses today. And when Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me and the chief baker in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, we dreamed on the same night, he and I, each having a dream with its own interpretation. A young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. So he remembers after 2 years, he finally remembers. And when we told him, he interpreted our dreams to us, giving an interpretation to each man according to his dream. And as he interpreted to us, so it came about, I was restored to my office, and the baker was hanged. And then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they quickly brought him out of the pit. 2 years, and he's in there, he's thinking, here's another day. He has no idea what's fixing to happen. And they come and get him. And when he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came in before Pharaoh. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. And Joseph said to Pharaoh, notice, it is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. And then Pharaoh said to Joseph, behold, in my dreams I was standing by the Nile. And he tells the story again. And let's skip on down to verse 25. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one. Two dreams, but they mean the same thing. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. And the 7 good cows are 7 good years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dreams are one. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty ears, blighted by the east wind, are also 7 years of famine. It is as I told Pharaoh, listen, God has shown to Pharaoh what he is about to do. And there will come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt. And the story goes on to tell what happened exactly, that there would be 7 years, good years, and then there would be 7 years of famine. And he told him that in verse 32, and the doubling of Pharaoh's dream means that the thing is fixed by God, and God will shortly bring it about. Now therefore let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man. Now look how bold he becomes. Just think about it. He's in a pit, he's in the prison, and I'm sure he's all nasty and beard, and he looks like I can't even remember his name now, over in Afghanistan when they found him. Osama bin Laden. See, I can't think when I'm up here. Things don't come to my mind. Osama bin Laden, can you imagine how he looked? Well, I can imagine Joseph kind of looking like that too in a pit. And he said, therefore let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. So he's telling Pharaoh what he needs to do. Pretty bold. Let Pharaoh proceed to appoint overseers over the land and take 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 plentiful years, and let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh for food in the cities, and let them keep it, that food shall be a reserve for the land against the 7 years of famine that are to occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land may not perish through the famine. This proposal pleased Pharaoh, so he doesn't mind being told what to do. Sometimes we don't like to be told what to do, but maybe sometimes we ought to listen. And Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find a man like this in whom is the Spirit of God? So Pharaoh recognized what Joseph had said. It's not about me. It's about God. And then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has shown you all this, there is none so discerning and wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only as regards to the throne will I be greater than you. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh took his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and clothed him in garments of fine linen, and put a gold chain around his neck. Remember, where was he at this morning? Now he's over the whole land of Egypt, or the number 2 man, only behind Pharaoh from prison. And he made him ride in the second chariot, and he called out before him, Bend the knee. Thus he set him over all the land of Egypt. So now he's got people bowing down to him. Think about where he came from. Moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without your consent no one shall lift up a hand and foot in all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name. Okay, I went to school in Alabama, so I'm not good with the names, but the way I see that is Zaphenath Paneah. And he gave him in marriage to Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. That may be On, but I learned it as On, O-N. So Joseph went out over the land of Egypt. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh of Egypt. Now think about that. You remember last week he was 17, not long ago when we were studying. And now he's 30 years old. He's still a young man, but he's been through a whole lot. And can you imagine what the people in Egypt thought of this? You know, he's a prisoner, and now we're having to bow down to a 30-year-old. And if you've ever been in any other countries, you know how much young people are respected. No, they're not. They look to old people. Young people don't have much to say in most customs. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went through all the land of Egypt. And during the 7 plentiful years, the earth produced abundantly. And he gathered up the food in these 7 years which occurred in the land of Egypt and put the food in the cities. He put in every city food from the fields around it, and Joseph stored up grain in great abundance, like the sand of the sea, until he ceased to measure it, for it could not be measured. And before the year of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph from the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. And Asenath bore them to him. And Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, and he said, God has made me forget all my hardship in all my father's house. And the name of the second one he called Ephraim, for God had made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. So he's honoring God, see, even in the names of his sons. And the 7 years of plenty that occurred in the land of Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began to come, and as Joseph had said. And there was famine in all lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. And when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. And Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, Go to Joseph. What he says to you, do. And when the famine had spread over all the land, Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. Moreover, all the earth came to Egypt to Joseph to buy grain, because the famine was severe all over the earth. And there we end chapter 41. So I wanted us to go over this story so that when we talk about the next few things we're going to talk about, that we can think back of actually how this really happened. Now Joseph said, remember me. And then 2 whole years went by. And now he's about 30 years old later. So what are the lessons that we can learn from what we've read today? And I want you to think about it. Think about it. And I'm going to give you a few that I kind of thought about as I read this, because we've heard this story of Joseph, a lot of us, for all our lives. I remember when I was a kid, one of the first stories I remember learning in class was Joseph and the coat of many colors. And one of the first things that I thought about in verse 14 was respect. Joseph had respect for authority. You know, remember he was all bearded and I'm sure he was dirty. And the first thing he did when he knew that he was going before the king, he cleaned up. He cleaned himself up. Because Egyptians were known to be very clean shaven, from my understanding from history. And he cleaned himself up. Now that tells us something in today's world. We don't have a lot of respect anymore in our country. And you know that even creeps into the church. Think about it. But when we present ourselves to people, whether it be in the world or to our brothers and sisters in Christ or to our leadership in the church, we should respect that. We should respect that. And I guess you could go a lot of different directions with this, but I don't know, that just struck me that he cleaned himself up. Remember what Romans says, 13:7. Remember, therefore, to all their due, honor to honor. And though we do not like some of the people who are in charge sometimes, the President of the United States, we need to give honor to whom honor is due, to that position. Not necessarily to what that person thinks or believes, but we need to show honor to the position. As Christians, that's what we should do. We have to be an example. And you know, a lot of times, our children, all the time, our children see what we do. And if we start a pattern of disrespect, then we can expect to have problems in the future. So we need to have respect. Number 2, what about the credit? Give God the credit and the glory. We see Joseph 3 times give the credit back to God in this chapter. He gives the credit to God. You know, he could have taken some credit and he said, you know, I did this and I did that. But he didn't do that. He didn't do that. He was a man of humility. And he knew where his blessings came from. You know, we need to remember Philippians chapter 4, verse 13. I can do all things through who? Through Christ who strengthens me. We're nothing without Christ. Think about that. We're nothing. So we can learn a lesson from this story about where we need to give credit. We can see a great example of that. The next thing I saw was help. Help people through the storms of life. You know, Joseph helped the people of Egypt make it through 7 years of famine. And when all the 7 years were going and the grain was coming in from everywhere for bread and they were storing it up and saving, you know, we can learn from that lesson also. And I think the older I get, the more I understand why when things are good, you need to save a little bit because you know what's coming. You know what's coming. So we need to save sometimes. That don't mean save everything we get. But we just need to think about it and realize that God is blessing me and I need to take care of some of this. Because the time is going to come later when it's not going to be as good as it is today. So Joseph helped. He even had the boldness to say to Pharaoh, this is what you need to do. And Pharaoh listened to him. I think a lot of that reasoning is because he gave the credit to God. So Pharaoh saw that. Next, example. Again, just like I just said, Joseph was a good example to Pharaoh, so he saw that example. You know, when we obey those who rule over us, we noticed. Let me start over with that. People notice when we believe and trust God. When we obey those who rule over us, and when we always do the right thing. Example. Joseph was a great example. Something for us to learn today. Always do the right thing. And sometimes that's in things that's very simple. Sometimes we don't even think about how we respond to things in front of other people. And Joseph was a great example, and we can be a great example to those around us too, just by simply doing what's right. And sometimes when I talk to kids or a group of kids, I say, just do the right thing. You got a decision in front of you. You can easily see that decision. Do the right thing. It'll save you a lot of problems in the future. It's not rocket science. But we've all been kids. And we don't always make the right decision. But we need to encourage them to make the right decision every time. Just like we can notice that Joseph does. So Joseph, we can see, was remembered and he was promoted for doing the right thing. Next, hang on. You think, well, where's he coming from with this out of this story? Brothers and sisters, life is like a roller coaster. And we never know what's coming next. It's up and down, up and down, up and down. Think about Joseph's life, how it changed instantly many times. One minute, Joseph's the favorite son, and then he's in a pit waiting to die. And he's taken out of the pit, his life is spared. They sold him as a slave. And then he was sold again to Potiphar. Life turns good for him again. And Potiphar's wife lies, and where is he at? Back in the pit. So we see life going up and down, up and down. Cupbearer remembers him finally after 2 years. And he's taken out of jail and he's cleaned up and he's taken to Pharaoh. And I can just imagine Joseph being a human. At this point, he's thinking, man, what's next? What's coming next? Because he don't know the end of the story. What's coming next? So Joseph had to be wanting to ask God questions. What are you doing to me? What's going on? Do you ever get in that position? Listen to this statement right here. Asking God questions is not wrong, but questioning God is wrong. Think about that. Big difference, isn't it? So it's not wrong that we ask God, why is this going on? Why is this happening? And we've all been in that situation. And it's not wrong to question that, but it's wrong to question God as far as what He has put in place and decided that will happen. So, hang on, because we're going to be in a ride. You're going up and down in life. You know, another great example of this situation is Job. And Job wanted to sit down with God and to ask questions. Look at Job chapter 23. Let's look at this a minute. Job chapter 23. Of all the things that happened to Job, everything had been taken away from him. And you know he's in a position to where he's got to be questioning. And in chapter 23 and verse 3, Job said, "Oh, that I knew where I might find him, that I might come even to his seat. I would lay my case before him and fill my mouth with arguments. I would know what he would answer me and understand what he would say to me. Would he contend with me in the greatness of his power? No. He would pay attention to me." See, Joseph realizes that God would listen to him. If he approached him and asked him questions in the right way, God would listen to him. There an upright man could argue with him, and I would be acquitted forever by my judge. So, in Job, we see another man that could question God for what had happened to him, all the things that had happened in his life and been taken away. And he, like Joseph, still remembered who was should be in first place. Who should be most important. And he remembered God. Joseph remembered God. Job, should I say. Joseph's life changed instantly many times, as we said. And he remembered God. A lesson to us that we have to hang on. Now let's look at a few more examples. There's a quote a person once said, and his name was A.W. Tozer. "There are benefits that only come through struggles." If we always got what we wanted and we always got our way, we would have just expected. And when good things happen, sometimes it don't happen without struggles. And we have to really go through struggles to appreciate things sometimes, because we can't really appreciate it until we've lived the hard life. And I think that's the way it is. You know, I grew up, my parents, we went to church every Sunday. If the doors were open, we were there. And my dad used to tell me, because he didn't grow up in the church, he used to say, "You will never understand someone who comes from a background not in the church, not a Christian background. You won't never understand it." And sometimes you think about that. That's the case. I can't understand that. We're all different. And we all come from different backgrounds. We all have our own luggage. So, everybody deals with different things. You know, Job was, even though he suffered greatly through it, he didn't deserve it, according to our opinion. But you know, then he had an opportunity to sit down with God. And if we look further in chapter 38, verse 1 through 3, Joseph was not prepared. when he talked to God and he got his opportunity, he was not prepared. Job, I'm sorry, not Joseph. I'm like Jimmy. All the J's, the Job and the Joseph get mixed up. But anyway, Job did not deserve the suffering that he received. And when he got his opportunity to talk to God, to sit down with God, he wasn't prepared, if we go on and study that. All right, let's look at Peter. Look at Peter's life. He started strong. He said, "You are the Christ." Remember Peter? And then what happened? He denied. 3 times he denied. I don't know him. I don't know him. But you know, then he was restored to become a great evangelist. We remember Peter preaching the first gospel sermon, Pentecost. What about Paul? Paul started on the wrong side. Paul was sincerely wrong. He persecuted the church. And he was sincerely wrong. And then Jesus confronted him, and his life changed totally. And he became a great missionary and writer. Matter of fact, he wrote most of the biggest part of the New Testament after he persecuted Christians. He killed Christians. So you talking about a life up and down, a roller coaster? Hang on, Paul. Now we return back to Joseph. Life changed drastically many times. You can say, you know the old saying, rags to riches. We can actually see rags to riches in this story. You know, I read a quote last night. Ooh. When you don't teach regular, you don't know what the clock, you don't understand how time passes. I read this last night on Facebook. Sometimes you got to just lay on your bed, stare at the ceiling, and talk to God about everything in life that feels heavy, and tell Him that you trust Him, even though nothing makes sense right now. There's a lot of wisdom in that, isn't it? Sometimes you just got to lay there and you got to look at the ceiling and you got to trust God. That's not always easy, especially when you're going through the suffering times. It's not easy. Not at all. So, sometimes we just have to remember. We have to remember. You know, Joseph many times had to wait. You know, we're on God's time. In 2 Peter 3 and verse 8 and 9, we can see that with one day is 1,000 with God. God doesn't look at time like we do. And we get impatient sometimes and we don't understand what God's doing in this up and down. And when that happens, we need to remember the promises. We just need to remember the promises that God has promised us. And we need to wait. Bottom line, God never forgot Joseph, and Joseph never forgot God. Look at how much the Scripture talks about waiting. It's a big message to us today, waiting. And I was going to cover some of these. I don't have time. But 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 places that I picked out of Psalms. And there are multiple places in the Scripture that talks about waiting. And more through the Old Testament and even in the New Testament. you remember Isaiah, those that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. So sometimes we just have to wait. And I learned that from when I looked at this lesson. Now, I want to close with this. What did I learn from this? I have to trust God. I have to remain faithful. And I have to wait. And that's not easy for us sometimes. And I even had a note in here, believe it or not, time permitting. What did you pick up in this chapter?
Lamentations chapter 3 and verse 25. The Lord is good to those who wait for Him, to the soul who seeks Him. It is good that one should wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord.
Exactly. That was one of my scriptures. But I didn't get time to cover those, but great point. Great point. You know, yeah, Joseph did that. Joseph did that. And some of the other things that I thought about that we could have looked at was humility. My clicker's not working. I need to wait. Trust God. Remain faithful. And wait on the clicker. But a few other things that I thought about that we could have talked about today was, what about Joseph's humility? What about his integrity? What about his self-control? I mean, you can go on and on learning in this chapter. In one chapter, all the things that we can learn about. Next week, hopefully your good teacher will be back. And his lesson will be the rewards of righteousness. So we see Joseph. He is remembered and promoted today. And next week we will see more about how he was rewarded. And some of that will be part of chapter 41 that we read. So thank you for your attention. And we look forward to the next lesson. Thank you.